Hello, everyone. Welcome to Get It, Got It Good. I am your host, Nysia Wilhite-Carter. And today we have a special event with us. We are doing a panel discussion based on the movie Equal Standard, written and produced by Taheim, Bryan, who we have with us today. In a moment, because this technology, and if I drop off, everybody still hear me.
She done dropped off already.
Yeah, that feedback is crucial.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we have everyone here. Yes. So I'm going to go through and introduce the panel as best as I can. Hopefully, I'm just maybe one or wait a second before we get fully started and engaged. So first, the panel as we have it. All right. So I'm going to go around the circle or around the square, the checkerboard, to my right. So on today's panel, we have Supervisory Wilhite, who is also the consultant. Then we also have Baltimore North Police Commission in the third. Andrew Roscoe. Assistant professor in the department at American University, TaLisa Carter, and Baltimore.
All right. Can anybody hear her? Is it cutting out just for me?
So I'm going to do.
No, I think it's all of us.
I'm sorry. It's cutting out.
Yeah, badly.
Like we can't hear anything
at all.
Yeah, we can't hear you. Yeah, because you sound like a robot.
Yeah, so maybe we can introduce ourselves while she gives us a little time.
Right.
I hope she's okay with that. I hope you can hear me. So I'll start and then we'll just go around the circle. Okay. So my name is Dr. TaLisa J. Carter. I'm excited to be here today. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Justice, Law, and Criminology at American University in Washington, D.C. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. And now, sir with the blue striped shirt, because I don't know you guys' names.
Okay. How are you doing? I'm Michael Timothy Wilhite Sr. I am a DEA supervised special agent, retired, and currently the owner of MTW Consulting LLC. I also, from 2015 to 2017, was the head DEA agent in Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Excited to have you. And sir with the bow tie.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Shorter. I'm the commanding officer of the Northern District with the Baltimore City Police Department. I've been in law enforcement nearly 30 years. I think I'm on my leg of the Baltimore Police Department where we're seeing the shift in policing. So I felt it was important to jump on this discussion and review this movie to talk about how it plays a part in policing in America.
Awesome. The only name I do know, Captain Lilly.
So my name is Orlando Lilly. That is the name that you can call me by. I'm not big on titles. However, I have been a commander with the Baltimore County Police Department. Actually been working in County Police Department for 27 years. I was previously assigned to the Youth and Community Resources section, as well as one of the other precincts that's actually on the east side of town. And I also had recruitment and employment as well. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Baltimore, where I teach statistics in the criminal justice department. And also, in addition to that, I used to teach ethics and diversity with the local community college here as well. And currently, I'm still dabbling in so many other things. I'm a noble president, a noble executive board member, actually the Sergeant at Arms, which is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executive, for those of you who are not familiar with Noble. And I'm the director of mentoring and recruitment for the collective agreement of Black law enforcement executives, graduate of the FBI National Academy 226 8th session of the Academy, and a proud member of Phi Beta Sigma Incorporated, as well as a member of Mason. And I see you shake your head, don't be a hater. And also a United States Navy veteran as well.
Army.
Thank you.
He's not big on titles, right?
Sir, with the blazer and the button up.
Good job. Good job.
So good morning. My name is Osborne Robinson. I am a retired Baltimore City police executive. I spent 25 years with Baltimore City Police Department. Before I left, I commanded all 9 police precincts, and I also ran an inspection and integrity unit prior to leaving Baltimore. After leaving Baltimore, I went to Reading, Pennsylvania, where I was the deputy chief of their police department. And then upon leaving there, I was the police commissioner in York City Police Department, which is also in Pennsylvania. And I am a proud member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated.
Sir, with the colorful hat and glasses.
Good morning. How y'all doing? I'm Taheim, Bryan. I'm the writer, the producer, the financier, of the film Equal Standard that we here today to discuss about. I'm honored to be here with you all. I see you're a traveling man. I heard you say that you also. So I know I got a lot of family that are travelers to the east. You know what I mean? So that's a beautiful thing, and glad to be here.
Yeah, we are definitely honored to have you here, as this movie is the main point of our discussion. And so, sir, with the button-up white buttons and black glasses.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Andrew Rossow. I am a criminal defense attorney. Been practicing for about 5 years, primarily with respect to the opioid epidemic throughout the state of Ohio, Texas, and the rest of the U.S. I'm also an adjunct cybersecurity professor at the University of Dayton School of Law in Ohio. And I want to thank everybody for being here. And Taheim, thank you so much for having me here as well. So thank you.
And last but definitely not least, sir, with the black shirt.
Good morning, everybody. Privileged to be here with all of you. My name is Michael Nila, and I am retired from the Aurora, Illinois Police Department after 29 years, retired as a commander. Been retired now for 22 years, and I teach. I've been teaching police officers for about almost the last 40 years in leadership, diversity, some of these very hard issues that are working to transform the police. I'm actually sitting at the San Francisco Police Academy right now as we're doing a Blue Courage course right now for them. So you have the privilege of training all over the world, and a privilege to watch the movie as well.
Awesome. And so again, just going to give our host, Miss Carter, a couple more minutes, as I'm a Miss Carter too. I think maybe this was kind of meant to be. So I don't know the direction she wanted to get started, but I think maybe it's appropriate to have the author of the movie set the framing for the people who maybe can only hear us and can't see us or haven't been exposed to the movie yet. Just kind of a brief overview before we dive in.
Well, Equal Standard is a movie where systemic racism basically gets confronted after two detectives stop an off-duty cop for making, quote unquote, making a loud noise, him and his friend, and leads to one fighting for his life in freedom and other ones dying in the course of it, and all gangs across New York coming together. So basically what you're seeing on live television day and on your PDF phone. And I created the film based on, because I did 12 years. I did state and federal time. So I was basically confronted with it hard on, and but I don't use the choices I make as a crutch, as or to a deviant to say, well, this is why my life turned out to be it is. But it was a lesson learned. I wouldn't want to turn the hands of time back. It taught me who I am. It showed me direction. I became a staple in my community, letting the people know with the criminal background or without one, it's possible. And letting them know that the sky's only a destination. The mind is the limit.
Thank you. So the first question, and I'll move to our former DEA specialist. The first question is thoughts about the movie. What were your thoughts about the movie, just in general, and then we'll move on to Major Shorter after that, and then the retired chief after that.
Well, there was, first of all, I want to give shouts out and congrats to the director and writer and stuff. I mean, you did an outstanding job, man, right off the bat. There was an interview done with you and I think Ice-T, and Ice-T basically said the reason why he supported your efforts because it showed various size of shows different size of the arena, and he was right. I mean, you definitely showed police officers, good and bad. You showed the gang aspect, the street gang aspect of it, good and bad, and the way how they were able to basically come with get involved and develop a truce to basically curtail the violence in the community. You showed police officers that by their presence could be construed as, I'm gonna say knuckleheads, but when you look when you dig deep into them, they were actually honorable cops. They were officers. They did the right thing. So that being said, I think you did touch on every aspect of it. I myself, the 30 plus years I've been in law enforcement, that's federal and state corrections, Illinois State trooper, and of course DEA supervisor special agent. I've ran across a lot of these same things myself, and sure as some of my panel members also. So you did a good job in touching each point of just aspects of being black in America, being a black law enforcement officer in America.
Thank you.
Major Shorter.
Okay, for me, watching this film, it hit home because the detective basically played the role of what I do and have done in my career. So the racial tension internally, externally, was the foundation of this quagmire presented in this film. It brought up the thoughts of protect and serve. What are you protecting and who are you serving? I've always believed African American men have always stood on the shoulders of African American women, and African American men and women have experiences separate and equal that are often unexplainable, not only in law enforcement but in life in general. African American men in law enforcement have a moral obligation to the badge. Standing in a battle together or alone in a war is what really was one of the words or few words that touched me. The racial divide, the blue line is often a ghost that only those who train lenses are able to see. African Americans in law enforcement, more times than not, have a different style of policing than other nationalities. This film touched me in many different ways, and it showed the connection that in African American families and what African American officers go through on a daily basis. I too want to commend the writer. It was great how you put it all together, and it showed the battles that as African Americans we have on both sides of the line, whether it's the criminal element or the law enforcement or criminal justice element. At the end of the day, it's about protecting one another. And to throw the touch of the interracial marriage was masterful. And we talked about, me and Osborne talked about that, and I'll let him elaborate further what we talked about that. But that was very masterful to show how those things do exist. But at the foundation of that, still to me, was a black woman, and it showed how she not only supported the Caucasian man, but on the flip side, she supported, in the other instance, she supported the black man as a sergeant in the police department. So it was really many roads that we could go down in reference to this film, but it was a great film to me.
Thank you.
So, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Yay! This is the third computer that I've had to try. So, with that being over, I appreciate you guys keeping it moving. I know we had Mr. Wilhite's thoughts, Major Shorter's thoughts. Anybody else want to comment on real fast?
Yeah, I'll chime in really quickly. And so, to the director, outstanding job. Very well balanced movie. Initially, when I watched it a couple of times, I wanted to sort of watch it as a viewer and then watch it and critique. And the viewer in me said, wow, this is kind of all over the place. But when I started to really delve into it the second time, I realized the genius in how many different issues that you were able to cover in one movie. So it was a very, very well balanced movie. It considered the internal culture of police departments, both the police department as a whole, and then how police departments are sort of dissected by race, by gender, and by other classifications. It looked into the family culture, which was very interesting for me, when you have a family unit that are both a part of, both mom and dad are a part of a police department, and the background to what that looks like, trying to work within the culture of the police department and maintain the sanity of your own family. And then it was the sort of internal quagmires of an individual officer, and the different things that they go to. It explored the life of a black officer. But one of the things that really, it was two things that really stood out. One was the relational equity that sometimes black officers in urban environments were police officers, in terms of the relational equity that they have to leverage for the benefit of the police department and or the betterment of communities all across America. Because there are certain things that we all bring to the table. But many times you have the officers that come up in urban environments that work for the police departments that they grew up in, and they have a different type of relational equity and a different type of understanding and connection to the community that many others that don't come from that environment, they don't have. And so oftentimes throughout your career, you have to use your relational equity in the community to sort of leverage against the needs of the police department, and sort of the pressure sometimes that may be placed on you, either directly or indirectly, from commanders or even just yourself. And then there was one part of the movie, I think, that Major Shorter had touched on, when he was talking about the scene with the lieutenant from Internal Affairs having dinner with his family. I thought the cinematography was outstanding, with the close-up on the wine glass, where it was clear, almost to symbolize not seeing color. And then even with the red velvet cake and the streaks of red and white that sort of displayed this sort of integration of family. So overall, I just thought it was an outstanding movie. You did an excellent job, and it was very, very well balanced.
So,
and I'd like to.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much to the director and the writer as well. You know, I'm 31 years old. I'm a white millennial criminal defense attorney, and for myself and my peers, having a movie like this, a film with this type of message that is so relevant to not just the criminal defense and legal landscape, but from a general education standpoint. I remember going through law school, and you know, every law school teaches differently, but these types of issues didn't really come up in the actual educational curriculum. We learned these issues once we were out practicing ourselves. And I think for my generation and watching as my peers continue to grow, within the legal landscape, whether you're a prosecutor, defense attorney, whatever that may be, having a film like this was so instrumental, so needed. And I just want to say thank you. I've tried to share this, every article that's come out with friends now that the film is out digitally for everybody. I'm seeing that my friends are starting to watch it. So I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of my generation, who may not have always had the bigger picture. And for me, being able to move forward in my practice, keeping everything in mind and understanding that there is more to the legal landscape than what comes out of a textbook. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. So speaking on that, how do you feel as though the school system and in part, when it comes to educating future lawyers, how do you think they should go about educating these lawyers when it comes to racial tensions, racial inequities, the justice system? Because if they're not even aware that these things exist, doesn't that affect how you defend your client?
Absolutely. That's a great question and a great point. And yes, for 5 years, I've spent my time in jails and prisons, hoping to get my clients not just out of there, but into rehabilitation, but not just rehabilitation, getting them in front of a judge to be heard, to be seen, and to be given the benefit of the doubt. Because it's just with the curriculum that I've been exposed to, there is this fear from what I've seen from professors to tread carefully. And often that tread carefully is avoiding talking about specific types of cases, specific type of instances, in fear of sparking perhaps a highly tense argument in class. But that's the point of the law school curriculum, is to bring people from all over who have been accepted into a classroom to provoke thought, to provoke conversation where there are going to be disagreements. There are going to be individuals that say, I think you're wrong, or I disagree. The problem is the professors don't keep seeing that. They don't understand how far to push the why do you feel like that? Why? What is it that is guiding your point? And is it true of every professor? Certainly not. But I think this film is important.
So let me ask Dr. Carter, because you're in the educational system, correct? So How do you go about educating students in this realm?
Yeah, so I appreciate the insert. Let me just speak up for professors real quick. Hey, so I'll preface this by saying, so I used to be a correctional officer, right? So not in policing, but I worked in corrections. And that experience is rare, right? It's rare to have a faculty person, someone, we already spend enough time getting a PhD, right? To go from one career to another, right? So I used to be a correctional officer, so that immediately has ground my classroom experience differently. But to speak about the professoriate in general, the thing about law school is you can be a lawyer from anywhere, right? You can be a biologist in undergrad and then go to law school. You can be in English and then go to law school, right? That's how that works. So law school, when the enrollment is really diverse, right? But when people are passionate about these issues early on, even in undergrad, they can take courses with people like me, right? Sociology, criminology, African-American studies, right? These fields exist. And what professors tend to do, and where the movie is such a kind of force in the classroom, is that we rely on media to make points that perhaps people haven't been exposed to, right? Or media comes up in class. So Orange is the New Black comes up in my class all the time. Law and Order SVU comes up in my classroom all the time. CNN hearings, right, comes up in my classroom all the time. So the media has an intricate role, even out that supplements textbook knowledge, right? It's a way to bridge this connection. And it also helps us not age, right? The other thing about professors is that we don't plan to retire, right? I'm not planning to retire. I'm gonna be doing this. I'll be in school for always. And so the reality of that then is, how do I stay connected, right, to the next generation? And that often happens through media. So this movie in and of itself can be a vehicle that people in the classroom use to make textbook knowledge nuanced, complicated. And because the attorney that spoke before, he's completely right? There's just not enough pages in the textbook to tell the reality of the experiences of policing or corrections or attorneys. You're not going to get that. You're not going to get a professor that's been on the streets every time. You're not going to get that. So how do we do this? We use the media as an instrument.
Well, I have two things in that. First of all, to be a professor, to be a doctor, you have to have that, in the field training, that triage, that whatever. But to be a professor in law school, do you think it should be implemented where you would have to have some of those real life, like internships in the jail system, in the police department, in the things like that, in order to get that real life experience before going into the classroom, so that way they can be grounded, such as you?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question, and my answer is no, right? So this is gonna sound corny, but diversity of thought, right? So there's a kind of purist idealism around what justice looks like when you haven't been quote unquote jaded by working in the system, right? And so we need a balance. So do I think it should be mandatory that everyone that teaches crime, race, and justice have worked in the field? No, because there's something pure about being committed to a cause, but not having actually experienced the imbalances of the U.S. criminal justice system, right? So I've served child. I've seen people get knocked out, right? I've done all that, right? And that pushes me in a different way than someone who's never experienced these things, right? But still committed to just improving society. I think we need both. Do I think it's important that students are exposed to both? Yes. But do I think it should be a requirement to hold a position? No.
So let me ask everybody, because media does play a huge role in the perceptions of everybody, whether they're, in law enforcement, out of law enforcement, whatever the case may be. So do anybody have personal feelings on how cops are portrayed in the media, how Blacks are portrayed in the media, Latinos, Asians? Does that affect how you then do your job because you're worried about the media?
Overall, it shouldn't. If you're a constant professional, I think in the directors in the movie, there was a term used. He was a cop at the funeral. I think the scene at the funeral of the officer that got shot by the primary detective character. The mother approached the detective and said, "You're not, what are you doing here? What are you doing here?" The police officer's dad said, "You're not one of us. You're not one of us." The police officers that was there at the time of the shooting, in front of the neighborhood convenience store, and not one time acknowledged that this police officer detective was a cop. During the IA interview, the white police officer investigator asked him, "Do you acknowledge that this black police officer, this black detective, is a cop, is a police officer?" And so, what it gets to is that all this is based gears to is showing that there are entities in the police force that truly do not think that Blacks are police officers. They don't believe that we're part of this concept. So does it affect how you do your job? And then this is publicized? It shouldn't, but the reality is sometimes it does. Sometimes it does, but it shouldn't.
I like to take a stab at it. If we just focus on the title of the movie, Equal Standard, what's the standard and how is that standard established and who is established by? And I think the media plays a tremendous role in establishing those standards. The need to be accepted is more powerful than the most addictive drug that's out there. And African-American officers, more times than not, try to just fit in. And fitting in is what sometimes pushes us down that pigeonhole where those mistakes are made, where we just can't come from, which further enhances and puts us in a spotlight with the media. The questions are always asked, why don't African-American officers stand up for things that they feel are right? So you have the quagmire of doing what's right as opposed to fitting in. And that's where many of us get lost in that shuffle. So I think the media helps, but I think it more so destroys the images of law enforcement and the images of African Americans in law enforcement.
So you guys
I also think that there's rarely this piece that's covered. So the movie shows the internal piece of Black officers within the police department, but let's take it to how different segments of the community actually perceive Black officers. There are segments of the community that don't recognize officers as police officers. There's segments of the community that don't recognize Black officers or Latino officers based on their culture or their race, simply because they wear a uniform. So when all of those things, both the internal culture of the police department, as well as the societal cultures of urban environments, when all of those things collapse in one frame, and you have this officer of color that's in the middle of it, it creates some issues both internally, and in some cases, it may have officers question themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So can I squeeze in for a second? So James Baldwin once said that our private lives become our public witness. And so easy as it is to look at the external aspects of what we do, there are 8 essential intellectual traits. And when we're talking about dealing with people, and one of those things really are birthed out of this whole concept of emotional intelligence, right? And so when we're thinking about some of these things, particularly when you even look at that piece and to answer a question about the media thing, I think that when we come into this profession, nobody thinks about the aspect of the media. So what happens is the thing that drove Orlando Lilly to do this then almost starts to take a back seat because of the culture. And I want to hear Mike Nysia talk about this and about the culture, adapting to the culture. And so when we think about this, those some of those essential intellectual traits, there's 3 in mind that really comes to mind when I looked at this and when I think about what we do. One of them is going to be this piece about the intellectual humility, right? You have to have a level of conscience about the limits of your own knowledge, including a sensitivity to circumstances in which one navigates their own egocentric thinking that can function as self-deception. So we come in it and we say, okay, I want to be really connected with what I'm doing. And then we start finding ourselves doing things that have some level of cognitive dissonance to our oath, which is antithetical to serving. You know, you really cannot have those attitudinal skills, blatant those skills that allows us to have a servant heart that's both positive and persistent at the same time. Because then that requires you then to dive into one of those other essential intellectual traits of intellectual courage, having a level of conscience of the need to face and fairly address ideas and beliefs and viewpoints that are totally had these strong negative emotions to which we've not given a real thought out process of listening to other people and realizing then to that last one where I like talking about then connecting it to that intellectual empathy. That's where we all have that level of consciousness to be able to imagine ourselves and put ourselves in the place of other people. Well, we don't talk about this in many aspects when we're coming through the profession. Even if you're going to college, in many instances you don't. And in that realm, when the professor and the lawyer were talking earlier, it depends on where you went to school, right? For those like myself who started their collegiate careers at an HBCU, it became mandatory for you to learn a lot of things that were laid out as we navigated our own lives in America, as it were, from becoming slaves to here. And then how did that impact everything? And I think what ultimately happened is we start trying to separate those things and compartmentalize them and not realizing that we're not really teaching people what we consider to be those equipping skills, the ability to train and develop other people for service. What we do is we give them a tool bag to exert the things as it relates to the law. And the law is essential. And even when you get to the end in the movie where you hear the guy quoting Martin Luther King, you know, we would like to believe that law really can modify behavior, but until you and sometimes we can over-educate the head at the expense of the heart. And so until you get to the place where you can actually navigate what people believe internally and intrinsically, you're not going to get a lot of change. You can't legislate really behavior. And I think that that's where we kind of see ourselves at right now. We're trying to legislate behavior. And so what the director did, and everybody kind of pointed this out, I could have went into this and the retired commissioner talked about this. I could have went in there with my hat on and said, oh, well, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that. But I don't think that that's what he was trying to drive at. He was trying to drive at all these other things that happen and that sometimes we don't really talk about, because guess what? Most of us that's on here, we love what we do. We love what we do. And then it becomes a balancing act to try to balance what we're doing with our private lives, because these are our public witnesses when we come out here every day.
So, Mr. Nila, did you want to add to that as he requested?
Yeah, I would love to. First of all, I want to give tremendous kudos to everybody who had a hand in making the video, and certainly all of those comments that we've heard before, which I agree with everybody wholeheartedly. But I was really grateful to hear Orlando speak, because he's using the language of what we call Blue Courage, is what we are, the tool, the educational process we're using to literally transform the hearts and minds of our police officers. And my literally favorite parts of the movie were the human side, the families, showing the human side of the police officers, and how their professional side creates stress in their home life personally, because their families know what they're doing and what they're going to work to do and the struggles that they have. I loved seeing that. And then my other favorite piece was what Orlando talked about, where you can't legislate behavior. Martin Luther King's piece, there was a great sociologist 100 years ago who said, when mores are sufficient, laws, rules, and policies are unnecessary. But when mores, values are insufficient, laws, policies, and rules are unenforceable. And so I believe, yeah, the rules are important because they will force change, but the better way to change is transforming the human heart. And policing needs a heart transformation right now. I love policing dearly. I think it's one of the most noble callings anybody can ever do with their life. But this is a moment in time where it's a reckoning. We've been brought to our knees by many of the public events that have happened. And this is a time for us to take a look at ourselves. One of the things that I really was grateful that the movie portrayed is how too often police officers talk to the citizens. Of course, we were all troubled by the George Floyd killing, but I was equally troubled by the way they confronted him at the very first moments of the stop. The language, the ordering, the weapon being pointed at him. There's research being done by Stanford professors right now that say they can script, by hearing the first 45 words exchanged between a police officer and a citizen with 40% accuracy, they can predict that engagement will result in handcuffs or even a use of force. Mm-hmm. So, how we talk to people is critically important. In fact, right now in our training here in San Francisco, we're talking about respect and dignity and how we talk to people. So I was really grateful that was portrayed in the movie, because it seems like such a subtle thing, but it sets the tone immediately. In fact, that was one of the things the detective pushed back on right in the beginning. Just because you have a badge, that gives you the right to talk to us like that. Mm-hmm. So there were so many subtleties in the movie, and I'm going to use the movie as a catalyst and spark for us to have honest dialogue, because one of the challenges right now in the police profession is we don't know how to talk about this issue. We talk about it in whispers and hallways and locker rooms and amongst people of our own race and color. We need to be able to have honest, open dialogue and learn our stories of each other. And I'm hoping that this movie will be a catalyst for that for our profession.
Let me ask Donna, because you deal with the training aspect of it. That's the most important part, is through training, because the same way racism is taught, it could be eradicated through training. So through the training campaign, and because I heard it's really like no pass or fail with individuals that actually come into the academy. How do you vet out those ones that appear to be aggressive and ones that you hope that can get it right and not be as aggressive when they hit the streets?
Yeah, that's such a great point, because Orlando talked about our culture, and that is the number one thing that we have to take on. However, we too easily throw out the word culture without really understanding what that means. When we say the whole culture of policing is bad, flawed, broken, that's absolutely untrue. Are there pieces of our culture that don't serve us in the place that we want to go, don't serve our democracy, don't serve our sense of humanity? There's absolute truth to that. So the wise people who are intentionally creating or being the architect of a culture of a police agency, like Chief Scott out here in San Francisco, we have to take on the behaviors that are inappropriate, whether it's language, whether it's visible disrespect, whether it's how we hunt. Police officers are hunters, and we'll always be hunters. But the question becomes, who do we hunt, where do we hunt, and how do we hunt? That's the difference there. And so those are all cultural issues that leadership has not taken on yet. So I think there's a lot of points to this education around culture. How do we shape it? How do we make it is critically important. And then taking on the little behaviors, foul language, talking to people in a harsh way, confronting everybody as if they're a suspect and a bad guy from the lens of suspicion. Those are natural police behaviors that have been embedded in us forever. And how do we tackle those things and change them to moderate them? That's the question. And it can be done, not through training, but it can be done through education. There's a difference between training and education. One awakens the heart, and one is training you through rote. We are great in training in policing. We are horrible at educating the heart and the mind to think and discern at a deeper level.
Well, this is kind of interesting because the language that he's kind of using is kind of triggering me a little bit. You know what I mean? So you saying that police are actually hunters and who are actually identified as the prey. That's one thing.
Absolutely.
And hunters are usually placed inside the jungle where you actually looking to survive, which is hunting is an animal instinct. So as becoming an officer, from what I understand, the language is also used. You are no longer a civilian. So then when you got people that come into that union with the mindset or the privilege, and then hear the academy saying you're no longer a civilian, that automatically levels them to a place where they're privileged even more. Like, I'm not a civilian. I said, then who are we then? If you're no longer a civilian, then what are you? So basically what you're doing, you basically eliminating the humankind, the manhood of that integrity by even using that type of language. Because anytime you use a language or lie long enough, it could basically breed to being some form of perceptualized truth. And that's just the way it is. So the training aspect is kind of very important. That's why I'm kind of targeting you more so like this, because you are the teacher and there is no vetting. So basically, if you hear an aggressive officer in there and you still pushing them through with the mindset of hoping that they're going to create change when they get inside the so-called jungle, being that they're hunters, it's impossible. That's like I got another interview recently. That's like basically placing a community fish in an aggressive fish tank and just think he's either going to get bit on or he's going to bite. That's just the way it is.
Your point is so well taken. If I can just add, your point is so well taken. And these are the subtleties of the changes we have to make. Language matters. That's one of the big things we teach. The language we allow ourselves to use will ultimately, be the predictor of how we behave. Subtle things like in policing, when I started in policing, we carried a briefcase. Now police officers carry war bags. That's a very subtle distinction that says you are now going to what? In Ohio, one of the states that was investigated by the Department of Justice had a sign when they drove out of the police station. It said, "Now leaving your forward operating base," which means now you are going into war. Those little subtleties that shape the culture and ultimately shape behaviors are the things that we have to change. And so that's what we are doing through our education process. We are calling out that language. We are stopping that language. We're letting police officers learn and discover for themselves that language is harmful and it creates disparate impact. And we can't tell them to stop using the language. We've got to awaken their heart to say it's wrong. And Orlando's gone through that training that we call Blue Curd, so he understands what we're speaking to. But there's no question those things have to be challenged.
And so I wanted to add on to that too, because I'm big on us changing language, right? And so I'm gonna and break it down in where the goats can get it. So when you trained, all of us on here are trained to tie our shoe, right? But if I ask you, do you put the right lace over the left lace first or vice versa, you would have to think about it. Because now you already have synapses in the brain that has already paved the highway in your brain and you do that. But if I educate you on the importance of tying your shoe, now you begin to think about why you're tying the shoe. So Part of that issue that we have now is we put somebody through training, and in many instances, not all, in many instances, it just becomes a checkoff. We say, oh yeah, well, we sent people through implicit bias training. Okay, how are you going to now measure the education of them knowing the difference between their bias, or if it's are they cognizant of it or they're not, right? That's the educational component. And so the education piece is a journey in itself, right? You have to constantly say to yourselves, I'm going to sit down and do this, because many of us don't know the stories that what brought us here. Orlando Lilly became a cop because he was in a hospital because I got stabbed, and a cop saved my life. And the young guy who stabbed me is a lawyer now, because the lawyer who mitigated the case, uh, my family didn't want him to have a record, and I wasn't a saint, and I just didn't like happen to get stabbed. I put myself in that environment for that to happen. And so, but it became an education because I realized that that man that put his hand on me was from a profession that I was starting to be conditioned not to like. He didn't look like me, and I hadn't had a man really be compassionate towards me in a long time. So I said, I'm going to do what he did, because I understood at that moment that if I don't go back into the communities where people look like me in many instances, who have these relationships, and we're not saying these contentious relationships, we're not saying that then some of them are not warranted, right? Law enforcement has always gone through what we call a crisis cycle. You can go back as far as the Wickersham Commission. It always goes through these crisis cycles. And then we talk about the 21st century policing. And so now what I've been trying to do on my end is do these series of candid community conversations. I created a small curriculum where we just meet with community members and we allow them to ask questions, and we give them the language as it relates to race, right? Because there's a difference between racism and implicit bias. But then we also say, what is your expectation of the police, number one? Number two, what are you doing? How are you extending your role in that relationship? How are you making yourself learn about what it is that we do? At the end of this, I normally say this for the end, but I'm going to do it now in the interest of time. I'm going to challenge everybody on here that if you live in communities right now and you can't tell me the person who's command of the precinct or district that you in, or the officer that patrols your neighborhood, you need to ask yourself, are you doing your due diligence about creating a relationship? Right? Because what we're realizing is that this is a collective team. You said it good, brother. Segregating ourselves once we come into this profession is antithetical to our oath. So what I'm telling all of you is that none of us should leave this now, particularly the director or anybody else, people listening. Can you name the police officer who patrols your neighborhood? Do you know the name of that person? Because if the only time you're calling me or you have contact with me on the back of a crisis, that's not the time for a conversation, and you're not interested in that. You want me to handle your situation. So it's just something to think about.
Let me add on to the characteristics, how you use the shoelace. I kind of like the way now one may use under or one may use over, but still the ending result is to bound, to bring together. So let me implement equations in math. I may have been taught 2 + 1 is 3, or 2 + 2 is 4. You may have been taught 3 + 1. Is anyone wrong? There are no wrong, but one has a solution, which is math. One bridges the gap without even extending to find out what made them do that. So how do we result and begin in those areas? Because he as long as the shoelaces is tied and his bridges brought together, the shoe is on tight. But that doesn't. So instead of asking him what made you do it that way, what he may have a hidden agenda or why he did it that way, just to go against the laws of nature, what is done the other way. Because that's even with toilet paper. Who puts toilet paper with the paper coming over or the toilet paper going under? You know what I mean? So does it make one wrong? Does it one make right? But my thing is, which from your professionalism right there, and you being, do you pursue or even look and wonder why they do it that way, or do you just say, well, look, the shoe is tied. I don't care how they did it.
I think it would be too presumptuous for me to say I think about it that way, right? Because you're an individual, I'm an individual. I believe in, and I tell everybody this in every command I go to. First thing I say is I'm big on language, but more importantly, I'm big on relationships. There's a difference between a partnership and a relationship. All of us on here have lived long enough to have banked at a place and left that bank because another bank offered something. That's a partnership. You didn't feel nothing about it when you left. But the relationship, and I'm gonna use something that you just said about bridge, right? It's not a bridge unless everybody can walk over it. And so what I believe in investing in is investing in every person. Since I've been at this command, I just got to this command on January the 8th. I've had 174 meetings with community members, business leaders, faith-based leaders, as well as the police officers in this precinct, because I wanted to start diving into, well, what is the culture and what is it that people thinking about and what is it that everybody sees important? Everybody on here are not, and sometimes we forget this in policing. People aren't algorithms. And so we have to learn the balance between research, science, and policing. But you can't do that if you're not like learning people. And so there's one community that might have an issue with traffic. There's another issue, using some analogy to what you said, another issue with traffic, and they're both traffic problems, but they may be occurring for two different reasons. And so if I don't take the time to sit down and talk with them about what it is that they're seeing and then go make sure I'm putting my eyes on it myself, it becomes hard to actually build the bridge, because I know what the limitations of my role is. I know what I'm limited in doing. And we're all a team. Teams that lack the ability of trust, lack the ability to have these unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. And then ultimately what these things manifest and do, and they resonate in veiled discussions and guarded comments. And nobody ever really gets to what the real problem is. And so where I'm at right now is building the relationship, which requires time. If I'm not willing to make the investor time, then I shouldn't take on the role. Right. And a lot of times, I made that statement early on the top on because and you can call me Orlando, my title is what I do. It's not who I am. Right. And then I need to understand what that composes of. As a military person, we trained all the time, and I hated it until I got out and realized why we did it. And then realized once I got in law enforcement, we don't do it as much. And the higher up you move, the less you do it. Because it's almost like you can promote out of development. And that's a lie. Right? So this is me being vulnerable and transparent with you, right? Because I understand the power in what we talk about when we talk about those leadership skills. The ability to be able to cast vision, plan strategy, direct teams, and empower other people. But if you don't have anything in your toolkit other than a title, you can't do it. You can't do it.
I want to just add to that too, because there's also another piece because Taheim specifically asked about weeding out the bad officers in the academy. So this isn't a but, this is an and. You have the piece about having to develop relational equity, not partnerships, not engagement. Those are temporary fixes. But developing relationships, which we're talking about time, frequency, and duration. That's the only way that you develop relationships, right? But there's also a piece where you have 6 to 9 months of an academy. You're not going to unlearn 21 years of cultural, family, and experiences that an individual has. And in addition to that, it's like like being on a first date. Everybody's on their best behavior, right? So you're not really seeing who this person really is in the culmination of who they are and have developed into over 21 years. So the other piece has to be also accountability. Executives in law enforcement have to be able to call balls and strikes. And I'll leave you with this. When you go back to the George Floyd situation, when it first occurred, how many police executives across this country did you see dancing around whether or not that officer's behavior was right or wrong? Captain Lilly and I had a discussion the day after the video came out. And both of us could say unanimously that there was nothing appropriate about that officer's behavior. I don't need to see any additional video. I don't need to hear get any interviews. I can look at what I saw on that video and say it was absolutely wrong. So if we, as police executives, as an industry, collectively can't call balls and strikes, we're going to continue to have these problems.
So let me go ahead and in consideration of time, you guys, let's talk about accountability as well as partnership, because the movie also addressed the partnership. And I know what during the interview portion, the partner essentially lied. Well, he didn't essentially, he did lie. He said he never identified himself as a cop when they first approached, and pretty much just discredited everything. So when it comes to training, accountability, and partnership, really quickly, because I know a few of you guys on here are trainers and you all have had partners, how do you think we can address that issue? Because that comes to accountability and calling out what is wrong, what is right, the blue wall, and all of that stuff that we have been seeing in the media lately, and people dancing around if actions are warranted or not.
What I'll say, and kind of in short, is that it ultimately comes down to the intestinal fortitude of each individual, right? Because at the end of the day, when you really look at it, leadership is a lonely place because you have to call balls and strikes. And I'm not talking about the leadership as a result of passing and being promoted to sergeant, or being appointed to captain, or being appointed to police commissioner. I'm talking about every person who walks around and is sworn in as a police officer is a leader, or should know that that position requires you to be a leader, which means you have to stand alone and do the right thing when it calls for you to do the right thing. And if you are afraid to do that right thing, then you're probably selected the wrong place. And it goes back to everybody. This isn't a calling for everybody. This is a job for some people. And being a police officer isn't really a job. It is a lifestyle.
Exactly.
I mean, and so Barbara Kellerman writes this book called Bad Leadership. And she points out in one of the scenarios where the three type of people that watch Hitler do what they do. This talks about this bad, when we have a bad partner that does something, right? And she talks about the person who's a bystander, the person who just watched bad stuff happen. And then the person who becomes the evildoer, the person who participates in the bad stuff because they don't want it to be them. And then the person who's the acolyte, the person who just worship the people that just do bad stuff. Well, clearly, Officer Mitchell became an evildoer, right? He realized he made a decision based on his relationship, or at least my perception is he made a decision based on his relationship with his partner, because he also tried to mentally justify that him going through some problems with his wife and all this other stuff, when he had an opportunity probably at some point to go to somebody and saying, hey, my problem is having some problems, and it's starting to manifest in his behavior. Because that's all of us. All of us have a tendency that if we're going through something, to watch our behavior manifest in some other way because we're dealing with some other stuff. And police officers aren't immune for that. The difference is we don't have the luxury to do that. This is why normally we don't live as long when we leave. Michael is the high exception of many of us, because of what we call that burst stress, going up and down all day, who live a long time after we leave this profession. Because I can go from one call with somebody talking about a noise complaint, and the next call with four people killed in a homicide. And so I'm managing that on top of my private life. Remember what I said? Your private life become your public witness. And so it becomes, you can't catch everything on that initial, because I was in charge of employment. You try to create stuff, and then many times you might have somebody that has a clean background, never done it, one single thing in their life, which can kind of raise questions too, or should, right? Because Orlando Lilly might have been the kid, which this is not true for me, but he might have been the kid who didn't play any sports, didn't socialize with people, and now I'm giving him a job that's all about people. And now I'm asking him to do some things that he may not, I'm 53 years old. You asking a 21-year-old to come to me and deal with my 53-year-old problem. They've not lived enough life to deal with my 53-year-old problems.
And he may not be a people person,
Right. So it becomes difficult to measure everything when they're coming through the door and capture them when they're coming through the door.
I want to briefly I just want to briefly say something about accountability, because I think that, in terms of scholarship, I'm going to put on my doctor hat. It's dangerous to leave accountability at the individual level. right, to say that it's about personal integrity. That's a dangerous thing. The fact of the matter is that the system, criminal justice, criminal legal, whatever you want to call it, right, since language matters, right, this idea that to hold people accountable, that person needs to have integrity, society generally can't rely on that. The structure, the system itself has to force accountability. And so I train correctional officers, and in that similar vein, right, how to get people out. My argument is that accountability isn't just about punishing people. It's also about praising them. Accountability happens on a scale, right? But unfortunately, right, we're so punitive in this country. Everything is about firing people, locking them up forever and ever, right? The conversation stops, right, at accountability in terms of punishment. So one, a way to vet is if people were rewarded for snitching, right? If there was no fear attached, right, to holding people accountable. And that's for better or for worse, right? So because CEOs don't get praised. I don't get praised because I had a good day. It was a good shift. Nobody fought. Same thing for y'all, right? You don't get a certificate because you had a good shift. Right. But if we started implementing structural processes that hold people accountable for when they do their job well and when they do their job poorly, right, accountability would be a conversation instead of being so stigmatized. Right? Because that's what's happening. Right. What's happening is even saying the word accountability makes people uncomfortable.
I love that you can, because I would just get ready to speak to you and address that but not in that same retrospect. I was going to use, because justice does consist of penalty or reward equally. You know what I mean? And which is true. It does need to be enforced equally, but praise is based on individualism and how one favors the next person as opposed to others. See, me, I came from a different lifestyle. I may have ruled the street with an iron fist, or I may have ruled the streets with love, you know what I mean, or fairness. But whether I liked you or not, if you did something great and I didn't like you, I still rewarded you because you did something for me. Same way, if you do something wrong, I'm gonna punish you the same way as if I balance you out with something great that you do. And that's what we fail to realize, and how we choose to enforce that justice scale. We choose to say, well, I've known them too long. Yeah, but listen, I did know you too long, but you kind of deviating from the policy and what our oath protects. And that's where we choose to go wrong. We also fail at time because we swear we have so much time. Where we don't have no time. Time is against us every day. You know what I mean? So if we keep saying, no, we'll work on it. Nah, listen, we got to attack the situation when it first comes up. Then I want to speak to the police commissioner when he was saying in 6 to 8 months, it's hard to
let me back in the room, Jeff.
It's hard to really identify. It's hard to really identify with someone if you only been with them in the academy 8 months to really see who they really are. See, I don't agree completely with that, because if you listen keen enough and watch a person's behavior, because we're creatures of habit, it will reveal itself. You know what I mean? It's just a lot of times we choose to be over it and say, well, nah, that's probably what it was. But that gut is just when you tell you, like, yo, I kind of caught what that person just said or what that person just did. But we choose to kind of ignore a lot of the different hidden signs that are right there, right in front of your face, just to placate on. I don't want to be the one to expose him, because listen, we all here together. He may be the one that may be my partner, and I need him to protect the back of my head when we get out this patrol car. But again, when it comes to accountability and justice, it has to have a clear balance. The same way Justice Cardozo once said, justice is only blind to an ignorant ear. That lady justice, she wears that veil across her eyes only based off of the individual and how they choose to view people, because justice is really not blind at all. And if we go back into the police officer Derek Chauvin that was convicted, look how long it had to take the convicted man after a live lynching on television. They were trying to find every little cliche or issue to alter that conviction by saying if she would have stopped her phone, that young lady, from recording, they'd automatically try to find a technicality saying, well, that tape has been manipulated because it was stopped and then it was re-recorded on. So it just goes to show how we need to start moving to the forefront and our county officials held accountable for their actions and stop phrasing them as favoritism. Because if you was in a street life and you knew someone that wanted to get money with you, but you know if he's a fuck up, you may say, listen, I can't give you that. I may give you some just for you. You ain't got to give me no money no more because I know you're going to fuck my money up. And then the course of it, I'm going to have to do something to you because I have a whole other faculty that's going to watch how I choose to hand down that penalty or that reward. And that's what we go, we fail at because of that. We become too loyal to default as opposed to being protecting the integrity of who we are as individuals. And if we tap it even with the film, well, one thing I wanted to ask Dr. Lisa is because she's a Black woman, I know somewhat surprised all parents. How did that scene affect you when she said that when the little girl told her, it all speaks on media as well, when she said, Mom, do white cops hate Black people? When she knows her mother and father are officers, do white cops hate Black people? And she said, well, where did you hear that from? Because Peter said, white, look at the news, which is the media. How did that actually affect you, as well as men, because we are all fathers. We know how we are with our daughters, but for a woman that bared the child and carried it for 9 months, I'm curious to see how it affected you.
Yeah, so really great question. That was one of the key things, and Major Shorter, maybe, right? Okay, Major Shorter brought up the role of Black women in the film. That scene, especially. First of all, the moment she asked, it was quick, but the silence between the question and the answer felt like forever to me. And that, I think that's because even though I haven't been blessed to have children yet, I know that pause because it happens in class for me, right? I teach at a predominantly white institution. And so my Black students often look at me like, what are you going to say in front of all of my peers, right? How are you going to answer? How are you going to make this right? What are you going to say in your body? And I felt the silence. And there was a lot of heavy silences actually, but that was one of the heavier silences for me in the movie. And then the way she handled it also kind of reflects to me the intuition of a Black woman, right? This idea that you're not lying, right? But I'm going to usher you into the truth with such like a grace and resilience, right? And I think that is kind of the way we move, right? The people who identify as Black and female that we move. So the silence is really what caught me though, because so many things get lost right there. It wasn't, we'll talk about this later. It wasn't because I said so. It wasn't go to bed, let's table it. She answered the question. And I think that those conversations are critical, that no matter how you're feeling in this moment, what you're processing, that when you're talking to children, or not only children, but people that honestly don't know, right, that you put your stuff aside and answer the question with grace, right? And with this idea that it's the truth, but I'm going to usher you into the truth really, really cautiously. I think that's what was warranted at that time. It's a good question.
It's definitely, and as a mother, I definitely agree with that, because kids will always ask you questions that you're not prepared for. You're not ready to tell them the information, but at the same time, they're being exposed to it on a level faster than we can even blink, right? And so you have to usher them in. And because we are Black women, we have to do it in such a way that shows strength, truth, and still ease them into that. And I think it went further, whereas later in the movie, she said, I'd quit this job look how it's affecting our daughter. I will quit this job before I continue, just to protect my child. And I think we always put our children prior to anything else. So that definitely was a great moment.
Can I hit on the accountability piece real quick?
Sure.
So in my experience of people, when you talk about accountability, it leads to equality and equity, which aren't to me synonymous, but they have the same goal of reaching an equal outcome. And I've learned that people look at accountability and they're asking for something totally different. You can't teach morality. So when we put the thing about how do you weed out those in academy, law enforcement are often generational. So you have generations of people who have been taught to live and think a certain way, and to think in 6 months, 6 years, 16 years, 26 years, that you're going to change someone's innate seed that's been planted is unrealistic. And I think that's the issue that we have in law enforcement and the criminal justice system as a whole, because those biases that people have don't just go away because someone said, I want to change your heart or your mind, because your heart and your mind are just that, your heart and your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
I agree.
I want to add to that because I agree with the point that the good doctor brought up about accountability, and as well as she said something about being careful about the individual piece. And while I agree with that, I would also encourage you to consider this. While there are legal institutions, there are institutions of police department, that really isn't about a what. Institutions are really about who. And at each level, it still comes down to individuals or groups of individuals collectively having to have the integrity to make the decision. And so while we can talk about it theoretically as an institution, but institutions are made up of people who have to make those decisions.
Absolutely. So, you guys, because we are going over our time limit, this is definitely a discussion that we have to continue. We have to have this on multiple levels, on a frequency, because we all agree that building these relationships takes time, over and over consistency. And that's one thing that hasn't happened. And we have to get into these conversations that a lot of people don't want to have. This is considered a taboo conversation, but it's one of those that are definitely necessary. So any last thoughts, comments from you all before we wrap it up?
Yeah,
I'm going to add I'm going to add this about people skills, and I'm going to close it with people skills. The ability to relate to others, communicate, and at least spur the motivation that people have and confront. We got to get out of this fear of conflict to be able to discuss those difficult conversations. This is one of those conversations that can end in someone being very emotionally laced and emotionally triggered. And I always tell people this: if you're talking to me with your emotional brain and I'm listening with my rational and logical brain, it sounds like Charlie Brown mom, right? So ultimately the goal is move to the place where we can have a rational, logical discussion outside of Orlando's anecdotal experiences, because my experiences are my experiences, and I don't want you to minimize them or marginalize them, but I also don't want you to just make a decision from that. Let's look at it collectively and say, how do we move forward as we help really develop those people skills?
Yeah, I just want to say that to Taheim, it's not all gloom and doom. That little voice that you mentioned that some of the officers are doing back in the accountability and the training, that when you're trying to determine if that cadet or candidate is a good fit, believe me, I've done training at the DA Academy and the Illinois, the International Law Enforcement Academy for the State Department, called ILEA. And those voices, that happens. That really happens. There is a filtering process. It ain't just a check a block and everybody gets a pass. There are filtering. There's a filter. There is personalities that just don't fit. And we do whatever we can to get rid of those people, okay? But I also want to close with this. At some point, we've, as a profession, the police officer, as a whole, and there are a few that doesn't, but on a whole, we've gotten to us against them mindset. And it's not us against them. We are community service. We are that adage of serve and protect. That's what we're about. That is what we are about. That is what the core of law enforcement is about: serve and protect, with the emphasis on serving. Okay, it is not us against them. It's not a blue life against black lives and green lives and all that stuff. It's you serving your community. That's what we have to get back to. That's what we have to, when you get to the training or the education, my belief is that that's what we have to get back to: serving and protecting, and that we are public servers. We are public servers. That's what we are.
And, from an educational standpoint, Dr. Carter, I don't know what your thoughts are, but being able to ask questions from my generation, seeing a film like this and understanding that it's okay if you don't understand every aspect, but being able to say, I don't understand, can somebody explain, or can somebody show me or teach me? I don't hear that much with my peers. I have, people that think they know everything and don't. And there are a few that ask questions. I'm one of them. But I think this film also teaches that it's okay to ask questions. And Dr. Carter, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, yeah, I completely agree. I think, I want to encourage everybody listening and us to continue to ask questions, because you never know everything, right? And, you know, you need to be exposed to different things. I also want to say to Taheim, one of the sentences that's really stood out was, I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. And I just think that's such a powerful quote, but the 6 people are carrying you after you cross over. They love you, they know you. So I also want to encourage everybody to participate in whatever way you can in the system that needs changing, right? Because the 12 don't look like us, right? Oftentimes the people that are judging you, they don't look like you, they don't have your experiences. Whatever it is, whether it's jury duty, yeah, it sucks. I do it too, right? But participate, because you do have a role in every part of the system, right? Whether it's writing a letter, was advocating for yourself, was going to your child's PTA because suspensions are too high, whatever it is, right? You play your role, because judged by 12, then carried by 6. Them 12 people still don't look like you, but those 6 people probably will.
Anyone else? Final words?
I want to have one quote, but I also want to say something to Captain Lander. One thing I think from the quote, the statement that you said about the Charlie Brown and the womp womp womp. You know what I mean? I think that's probably that's how you start hearing them. I think you should be a little more receptive to the people that may be bitter or may have been taught the wrong way, and not shut down. Still try to be as open-minded as possible, because dealing with race, religion, and politics are very, very sensitive topics that do, of course, lead some people lost their lives tapping into them 3 topics right there. You know what I mean? So I think for a person that may come off aggressive, or could be many different ways, it could be based on the person's conviction or why they feel that's why they holding on to that stance, or to their teachings that was wrong, or intimidated. You know what I mean? So I do think you should be a little more open to people that, and don't shut down, because our bodies choose the tendency of showing if you shut down, but they're like, well, he's not even listening to me anyway. That's just one thing I would ask of you. You know what I mean? From the line of words,
Yeah,
and as being a black man, because when we talk every day to white America, that's all they hear is womp womp. You know what I mean? So we don't like that. So I think we should be a little more receptive to that as well. And another quote, what I like to say, and I'm gonna let you come back in. A quote I like to always say, with sacrifice, because sacrifice is a strong word dealing with a lot of the things that we protect. And I tell a person in a heartbeat, if one is not willing to sacrifice for the things they lust for in the greater good of life, the things they lust for in the greater life will become that sacrifice. So we have to worry about that and look into those key elements as well. But that's just something that I wanted to share. But go on.
So what I want to tell you is, you know, because I'm from North Carolina, born and raised. So most people haven't experienced Klan walks. Most people haven't seen any of that. I grew up when they shut schools down because Roots came on. So what I'm telling you is, even on this job, I played a role in bringing some issues to light the DOJ about how we deal people. So I believe we all got to get to the place where we're not listening for rebuttal. Number one, right? Number two is I've been in this fight for a long time on the inside. And so what I'm saying to us, we have to get better at laying out our case so we can be heard. Because what I can tell you this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. If you're in a relationship with somebody and you guys are yelling at each other, how much of that conversation did you walk away and say, I'm gonna make changes while you was yelling? Right? We don't. So what I'm saying is we got to get better. And I'm telling you that because one of my mentors said this to me. I went to a meeting with a chief of police years ago, and I was going there going off about our lack of minority representatives and how we didn't have people in certain units. And when I left out of that meeting, she called me to her office and she said, you know what you just did? You threw up on the table. And I said, I didn't know what she meant by that. She said, you know, if somebody threw up, it's hard for you to pick out what they was eating. Oh, you know that was a mess. So what I'm saying is we got to get better at having a discussion collectively so we can get ourselves heard to necessarily make the changes that way. That's what I'm saying, brother.
And that's true, because you do have your 2 types of listeners. You got your listeners that understand, listeners that want to respond. If you got one that just wants to respond, doesn't want to understand, then it will continue going on. It's basically falling on deaf ears. So of course, I agree with that. That's cool.
Absolutely wonderful. So you guys, I just want to take the time out to thank everybody for joining me. Absolutely, I want to say this is not the end. This can't be the end. This has to continue. So Mr. Wilhite, thank you. Major Jeffrey, Dr. Carter, Mr. Nila, Commissioner Robinson, Captain Lilly, Taheim Bryan, Andrew Rossow. Thank you. Did I miss anybody? I don't think so. So you guys, definitely stay tuned. We will put more of these together and have representation from all over the country, different races, creed, everything, because we want to hear everybody's voice. But I have to take a moment to shout out my networks: Total Entertainment Radio, WBGR Network, Power 904, DMR Radio, and of course my sponsors: Dance Solutions, Maryland Prep Academy, Favor One, One Man Sharpens Another. Got nothing but love for y'all. You guys can follow me at Get It Got It Good G3 across all social media networks. I will have links to all of the panel. And don't forget, as Captain Lilly always tells me, about the Citizenship Academy. If you want to know more about the inner workings of how the station works, we definitely got to get to know the people in our own districts and who are the leaders in those districts and form those relationships prior to things happening in order for anything to happen. You are a leader in your own community. You definitely have to take initiative and stop just passing the buck. Okay, so that's my 2 cents for today.
Also share everyone's like contact later on. I know you have everyone, so we can engage. Someone might want to engage after this or have questions. So I don't want to where it ends here. I may want to come out there and feel the energy in your communities and see what's really good out there.
Indeed, because Taheim and I were talking about bringing them into the cities and putting them together with these type of panel discussions. I definitely want to take a moment to shout you out, Taheim, because we are together because of you, because of this movie, because you are shedding light and actually using your talents and your skills to put a light on something that we all need to address. And this enables us to have a rational, intelligent conversation about the different aspects, whether you are a person in blue, whether you are African-American, white, Latino, whatever. And it enables us to not only say, I have to choose one or the other, especially as Black men in the force, or Latinos in the force, or Asians in the force, that you are who you are. We are all citizens. We all are in this together, and we have to act as like such, right? So you guys, definitely, we will be in contact. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever the case may be, definitely you can reach out to getitgotitgoodg3@gmail.com. You can tag me, DM me at any site, Nysia, NYSIA, Wilhite, or Carter across all social media platforms. Nothing but love for everybody. I know we all have things to do, places to be, so nothing but love for y'all. Until next time.
Peace. All right.
Thank you.
Exchange all that information with everyone for us, not just so we can in a group or whatever. All right, I appreciate that. Y'all stay safe
everyone.
out there. Thank you. Don't forget, it's on all digital platforms today.
Yeah, today.
All digital platforms. Watch it. Equal standard.
Watch it for sure. Peace.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, got you.